Hello and welcome to the desert with the Counter Corps, where today we'll be fighting the Easter Battle during the Siege of Tobruk through Multi-Man Publishing's Brazen Chariots. This is the first scenario in the game, and it's a 5-turn scenario. It's going to be pretty quick though, because as you can see, a lot of the formations are locked, which I'll discuss in a minute, and it usually does not end very well for the Germans, and the writing is usually on the wall pretty early in the scenario, but we have to give it a go, give it our honest shot to see if we can change the fate of the Easter battle, which did not turn out terribly good for the Germans, but you never know here at the Counter Corps, where a rule mistake might just save the day for the Germans. That's an inadvertent rule mistake, which I make quite a few of, but I'll try my best. So here we are in Tobruk. You can see the outer defenses that the Australians are manning, and the Italian Brescia division is out here on the western end of the siege lines with the Derna road leading into the city, and they, as well as all of the Commonwealth formations, begin the game locked, which means they cannot activate until and unless they are attacked or the Commonwealth player lifts all the locked markers at the start of one of the turns. So that means the only active formation at the beginning of the game is the 5th Light Division of the Germans, and it is going to be their job, and basically their job alone, to try to breach the defenses of the Australians and capture King's Cross, which is here, and Fort Pellestrino, which is here. That would result in a minor victory for the Germans, and if the Germans can make their way all the way up to Fort Solaro here and Fort Marcucci here, that would be a major victory for them. However, that would be a major accomplishment indeed, because, like I said, they only have the one division with which to attack 4 Australian brigades in the siege lines of Tobruk. So the Germans don't have many reinforcements, as you can see. On the first turn, they'll get a Panzer Battalion and a Pioneer Battalion. On turn 3, on April 13th, they'll get the Italian Trento Division, which, as you'll see, the Italians are quite fickle allies for the Germans throughout this campaign. On turn 4, they'll get another battalion from the Trento Division, as well as the Ariete Armor Division. And Armor Division for the Italians means not quite as strong as a German Panzer Division, but it might be something that could exploit one of the breakthroughs. Now, here is the Commonwealth Support Group, which is the only reinforcements they get in this scenario, and that only comes on if this road here, the Via Balbia, which is a primary road that goes from the eastern board edge through King's Cross and into the city of Tobruk. They only get those reinforcements starting turn 3 if there's no German unit on the Via Balbia. So if the Germans can get a unit on the Via Balbia, then the support column cannot reinforce the besieged forces in the Tobruk defense lines. So that's sort of the general outline of the state of the siege right now at the beginning of the Easter battle. Just another thing to note, you'll see up here I put the combat trains for the Australians in the water. That's because they should be going here, which is the Commonwealth supply point in Tobruk. It's the port. But if I stack them all up there, then when I go to try to move these 2 independent units, the Royal Tank Regiment and the 3rd Hussars, I usually wind up knocking them over. And you see I don't exactly have surgeon's hands with these tweezers. So I just put them up here in the Mediterranean for ease of access later on, though the supply trains for the Commonwealth are usually not a problem because they're usually optimal. There's usually nothing blocking. unless the Germans can get behind one of these formations and cut them off from the city of Tobruk. But basically this simulates the Commonwealth bringing in their supplies from Egypt by sea to Tobruk. So to take a look again closer at the Australians' defenders, in Tobruk we have a independent armored car battalion, 1st Royal Tank Regiment, and 3rd Hussars, and their light tankettes. They begin the game independent, and so they basically cannot be assigned until turn 2. Here we have the 18th Australian Brigade, which is 3 battalions strong. They begin basically in reserve and inside Fort Oriente. To the left on the Derma Road, we have the 26th Australian Brigade. They'll be facing off against the Brescia Division, the Italians, who I found kind of just sit here most of the game because, like I said, unless and until the Commonwealth unlocked all of their divisions, then the Brescia Division can't become unlocked. And then once they do become unlocked, they don't really have many access points to the siege lines. But we'll see if that changes. Now down here, covering the El Adam Road, you can see the El Adam Road leads from the south into the city of Tobruk through King's Cross. We have the 20th Australian Brigade on their flank, and covering the Via Balbia is the 24th Australian Brigade. And down here in the south, in El Adam, the village itself, is the 5th Light Division, which of course later would be turned into a full Panzer Division. But that would be after the Easter battles. So the Light Division includes these battalions as well as this MG battalion way out here on the flank, and their job is essentially going to be to cut the Via Balbia here at Point Walter so that the support column cannot come in. Now, as far as the German plans, since they only have the one division to work with here at the beginning, we're going to try to concentrate our forces up the El Adam Road and try to breach the fortification wires here at the 2nd Battalion of the 13th Australian Regiment on the red line there. And breaching it on the El Adam Road will allow reinforcements to follow the initial panzer push into the inner defenses of the Australians and try to exploit the breakthrough left and right to Fort Pilastrano and King's Cross at the very least. The Commonwealth player, on the other hand, he just needs to sit tight and react to whatever German aggression comes his way. All he has to do is just make sure that the Germans don't get both of these objectives, and he's fine. So he is able to unlock a unit if the Germans attack that unit. So he can organize localized counterattacks without having to unlock every unit that includes the Brescia Division. So he needs to see how many turns he can last without needing to unlock everybody before he has to basically commit some of his reserves like the 18th Australian or some of these independent units in order to fight back the Germans off of the objective points. So just a couple more scenario-specific notes. Well, actually, I should say Brazen Chariots specific notes. Because we're in the desert, there's no weather effects. It's always going to be hot and dusty. And as far as combat trains go, as long as the combat train has a primary or secondary route back to the supply source, is legal like every other BCS game. However, from the combat train to the headquarters, it can traverse basically open terrain, the desert. The trucks can just drive right over the desert to the headquarters without needing primary, secondary road or track. And the headquarters unit itself can go off-road as well and set up wherever it wants, as long as a truck can get there, basically. And there is also no mixing of streams. It's assumed that the trucks have the entire desert to work with and that they wouldn't bottle each other up on narrow roads like the one road that's in the area. So in the pre-turn phase, the only thing we have to do is note that the 5th Light Division will be getting a Panzer Battalion that is under strength and only has 1 step, as well as a Pioneer Battalion, which you'll notice does not have an attack arrow on it, which means it cannot initiate an attack, which will make it only good for the defense, basically. And it also means it cannot breach the wire of the fortifications. So they'll come in on point A. I don't have enough room on my table over here to keep it off the map, so it will be coming in there during the 5th Light Division's activation. And that sums it up for the pre-turn phase. The Commonwealth player would have to declare now basically whether he is going to unlock all of his formations. He is not. So it goes to the first player's activation, and for this scenario, the Germans are the first player. So for the first activation of the scenario, the Germans will be selecting the 5th Light Division, because that's the only formation they can activate right now at all. And plus, they do want to start the offensive. Rommel's breathing down Johannes Streich's neck. That's the general in command of the 5th Light Division at this time. And he, in turn, is going to be breathing down the neck of Colonel Ulbrich, who is in charge of the 5th Panzer Regiment here. And he's telling him to get up the Eladam Road. But first, we have to make some checks here. So in the preparation phase, our supply trains are good, and we're not mixed or prepared, and we're not making a prepared defense, sorry. So we go right to the snafu roll. The Germans are going to want a full activation here so that they can move all the units that they need into position to attack on their second activation if they get it. So on the snafu table, the 5th Light Division is not fresh, they're not coordinated. They have a fatigue level of 0, and for game-specific snafu, they're -1. All German formations are -1 in this scenario. And their supply trains are optimal, which is +1, so it's a straight die roll for the snafu table, and they're going to want a 7 or more for the full activation. And they get it, they get a 10, which means a full activation for the Light Division. Now we have to pan out quite a bit here to capture the entire extent of the Light Division's units. So we're going to first, I think, move the 1st Battalion of the 5th Panzer Regiment closer to the action. And you see this track here, this dotted track, that's the Ochsenstrasse, which is the bypass road that the Germans would make later in the siege. It's not built right now, but you can see why in this activation they would make a paved road or a improved road to move their units around the siege line, because right now they're going to have to move across country, which is not exactly the most efficient way to move. So with the 1st Battalion, they're coming in from off-map as reinforcements on point A. They have a movement of 14, so let's see how far that gets them. 1, 2, 3, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, let's put them here. That'll put them within range of their objective. We're not placing an objective, I should have said, because placing an objective risks a fatigue roll, and we're not going to be attacking on this activation, so there's no real point to place an objective that the Germans can see at this point anyway. For the Pioneer Battalion, they have a movement of 12 in the truck, so they're just going to be 2 hexes behind the Panzer Battalion, so they're going to be right there. Now, we want to get the 2nd Battalion here up to the action of the Eldam Road as quickly as possible. We're also going to want the MG Battalion underneath to get right up in the face of this Australian battalion and start breaching that wire. So to breach the wire, it needs to be a leg unit with an assault arrow. And they need to finish adjacent to the wire, and then at the end of the activation, the wire will become breached. And then in the subsequent activations, they'll be able to move through the wire. Otherwise, the wire is impassable terrain for infantry, and armor crossing the wire need to stop as soon as they get on the other side of it. Now, the light division will want to get armor on the other side of these fortification lines. So on the red line here, attacking across it from the south over it will give a defense modifier for the Australians. But if the Germans can get a Panzer Battalion behind the fortification line and attack from the flank, that will negate the die roll modifier for the fortification line. So first we will move the MG Battalion. We're going to keep it on its leg side because this is a primary road, and primary road provides half movement. So we should be able to get to the fortifications. Half 1, half 2, half 3, and a half. So with 3.5 movement, we can get here. And now these poor bastards are going to start working on the wire. And the 2nd Panzer Battalion here is going to, it's going to go to one side or the other of the MG Battalion. I'm thinking if we go on this side of the red line, since we're going to be attacking the 20th Australian, it's going to activate all of these units. And if we come in on this side, it's going to expose us to a counterattack from one of these units that are under the 20th Australian Brigade's command. So if we come over here, we're going to be only having to deal with one unit that we want to actually fight. So we're going to move up the road as well and move here with our 4 movement points. And so now we are starting to threaten, but no shots have been fired yet. And finally, we have this poor MG Battalion out here on his lonesome. His objective is Walter, to cut off the Via Balbia and prevent the support group from entering the battlefield. With his truck movement of 12 going across country, should have no problem. That's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And he's at Point Walter, where he will be cutting off the Via Balbia. Now, the Light Division's headquarters has a command radius of 12, which is pretty extensive, but it's not enough to cover both of these units. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to move the headquarters somewhere in this area to cover both the Pioneer Battalion way out here and the MG Battalion here. So let's see if what the point of equidistant between the two is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, maybe be here, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So if we move this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that will put us within, I'm sorry, I definitely can't do math. That is 2 hexes behind the Panzer Battalion. So we could move one further, but they're both all... we could move the headquarters unit into the walled village, but there's really no need. So it's still going to be within optimal distance of the combat trains, so we're just going to leave them there and pretend like I counted correctly the first time with the Pioneer Battalion. So that, I believe, is going to be the first activation for the Light Division. A pretty quiet one for the most part, but that will save us from having to roll on the fatigue table this time around. And now we are going to look to try to activate again. The Light Division activates on a 3 or more for a second activation, and let's see if they get it. Which they do. They roll a 4, which is enough to get a second activation. So we're going to mark the Light Division as used. And we're also going to mark with this die the 1 artillery point that the Light Division gets. Again, I should say this is going to be pending the snafu roll. So let's check the snafu. The formation is still at fatigue level 0. Game-specific snafu is -1, but the optimal trains gives that +1 back, so it is a straight roll. 7 or more, we get the full activation. And it's going to probably make me look silly by putting the die out already, but we'll see. Okay, and I'm saved the embarrassment. They roll a 10, and they get a full activation, which means all their artillery points get activated, and we will see where we want to move now. So here we are at the thick of things. First, I think what we're going to do is move the Panzer battalions and the Pioneer Battalion into the fray a little bit more. They're not going to be participating in the battle here. And before I forget, we need to put our double objective marker down. Because we get the full activation, we do get a double objective, which we're going to place on the 2nd Battalion of the 13th Australian Regiment there. So these 2 units are not going to be able to get into that battle. So let's just move them somewhere that will be useful to exploit the attack once they get through. And before I forget, we're just going to mark this with a breach in the wire marker because it ended its activation finished next to the wire, so it is breached. And now we're going to move these Panzer battalions. Now we do have an option. We could move in here and cut off these reinforcements. There is only 1 step on this battalion though, so any counterattack made could destroy that single step. So I think what we're going to do is sort of do a little button hook around the MG battalion and follow its sister regiment into the red line on this side of the formation. So we'll do that after this attack actually, but we will move the Pioneer Battalion under the MG Battalion. It's just going to follow the MG Battalion through the breach if and when we're able to knock the Australian Brigade off of the Eladam Road. So now we are going to push across the wire. We're going to be stopped, and now what the Panzer Battalion is going to want to do, I think, is try to knock the support off of this Australian battalion, because that'll help it on its combat rolls later in the activation. So if we do an engagement, have to roll a 6 or more to knock its support off temporarily and to remove that +1 DRM in the combat table. So I think that's what we're going to do with the 2nd Battalion there. On the engagement table, the AV plus its action rating for the German unit is 2 plus 5, which is 7. It's a double objective zone, so that's a +1, so that's 8. On the Australian side, they have a 5, plus the 2 of their anti-tank company that's in support is 7, and they're in a prepared defense, so that's 8. So it's an 8 to 8, 0 modifier, straight up roll. 6 or more for the Germans is what they need. And they get lucky. They get a 6 on the button, which means the support is temporarily dropped for the Australian battalion. And they no longer get that +1 modifier on the combat table. Now, the 2nd Battalion does have one more fire event to spend, and I don't see a reason not to attack by fire, which is basically just a barrage by an AV unit. But I am using the 2.0 rules for BCS, which introduced a new column for attack by fire, so you will need a 5 or a 6 to inflict a step loss on this battalion. But even if we do manage to make this retreat with a very high combat table die roll, it's going to come back with a vengeance. So if we can knock a step off it, I think that'll probably help us out in the long run. And we don't really lose anything by firing this attack by fire, because you're going to be using the combat table anyway. So that will require a high die roll on the fatigue table later. So we're just going to roll to see what we get. And we get a 5. So that is a -1 step. That's a hit. -1 step for that Australian battalion. Now let's see if I can maneuver in here to... So it's down to 5 steps now. So that was a good shooting by the Panzer Battalion. Now, I should also say, because it was attacked, the locked marker comes off of the 20th Australian. Now, the Panzer Battalion has no more fire events, but it can still attack on the combat table, which is what I think we're going to do. We really want to try to dislodge that Australian battalion off of this hex to allow our infantry to get into the fight further into the fortification line and get moving towards King's Cross. So we're going to need a high die roll, but it's going to have to happen eventually. And this Panzer Battalion does have 2 steps. So unless we roll really, really poorly, we're not going to eliminate it yet. So let's check out the combat table modifiers for this battle. For the 2nd Battalion of the 5th Panzer Regiment, their action rating is 5. They have no red AV support. They only have 2 88 companies and the Panzerjäger Battalion. So they're still at 5. They are in a double objective zone, which is 6. We're going to use the 1 artillery point for the formation to create a suppression mission, which is +2, which will be 8. They're getting an assist from the MG Battalion, which is a +1, which will be 9. And that is going to be it for the Germans. So they're at 9. The Australians are at 5, +1 for their prepared defense. They do not get a support +1 again because they dropped that support. So they're at 6, and that'll be it. They're not in any terrain, and they don't get the benefit of the fortification because the Panzer Battalion is attacking from the flank. So that is 9 to 6. It's a +3 modifier on this attack. Let's see if the Germans, ideally 11 or more on the modified roll, will get them to retreat. Otherwise, the Australians are going to be holding strong in that position. So Germans roll an 8, +3 is 11. So just barely they force out the Australians and they have to retreat. And they are going to suffer a 1-step loss. Because it is an automatic retreat, they will just be retreating 3 hexes away from the engagement and generally toward their headquarters. So first we'll inflict the 1 step loss, so they are down to 4 steps. And from here, I think they'll go 1, 2, 3. That will put them into that fortification zone, which seems to be a reasonable place to retreat to. And their temporary support drop goes with them for this activation. And now the Panzer Battalion advances after combat and occupies that hex. And it is finished now, as is the MG Battalion, which means they can't really do anything else this activation. But they secured their objective, and now it is up to the rest of the division to try to exploit that. And speaking of exploitation, we are now going to take the 1st Battalion here and see if we can get up into somewhere that's useful. Now ideally we would be on our deployed side to get that extra point of AV, but I don't know that we are going to be able to get even to the road with 1, 2, 3, 4. With our 4 attack movement on our deployed side, as you can see it's only 4. We wouldn't even get to the Aladam Road, so we probably want to get somewhere safe for the 1-step Panzer Battalion. We know that the only activation they're going to get is from the 20th Australian. We're pretty safe from the 24th Australian unless next turn the Commonwealth unlocks everybody. But if they do, then we'll at least have the Brescia Division to put pressure on from the west. So it's a long-winded way of saying we're going to try to get, I think, in this area with the 1st Panzer Battalion. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, through the breach, half 6, half 7. We could get there with 7 movement points. The only threat would be from this one attacking down the non-fortification side of this hex. But they would get a -1, and the armor is in the open, so they get a plus the added bonus for being in the open. So I think the Panzer Battalion will be safe here, coming up through the breach. There's no traffic marker from the result of the combat, so we don't have to stop in the combat zone, and we can just go right through it and still be within command radius and have a safe path back to the headquarters. And I think that's probably going to be it for the light division, and I'm going to clean up and I'll get back to you in a minute. So I cleaned up the markers. The only thing I did was, let's see how this goes when I pan. The only thing I did was flip the MG Battalion over to its deployed side to give it 1 more action rating, just in case. You never know. And so now the only thing we have to do is our fatigue roll. 1 to 3 will reduce our fatigue. 4 or higher, and we remain at fatigue 0 for the light division. And we roll a 5, so the light division remains at fatigue 0, and all is good in the neighborhood for now. And nothing is isolated, so it switches over to the Commonwealth activation. So the Commonwealth player is calling up the 20th Australian Brigade and telling them to fix the hole in their line. So we're activating the 20th Australian, and we're still in prepared defense. I think we're going to remain in prepared defense. This is just one of those questions I could probably ponder for the rest of the night, because we can't really counterattack while we're in prepared defense, but we know the next activation of the Light Division, they're coming after us at King's Cross, and it'd be nice to have that prepared defense modifier because there's nothing else going for us here at King's Cross. And if we want to have a shot at holding the position and not retreating on a situational die roll result, we need to keep in prepared defense. And as much as we want to counterattack, and as much as the commander of the garrison wants us to fix this, I don't think we're going to. So with our partial activation, we won't even get artillery points because we're at 1 artillery. Half is a half, rounded down to 0. So we can't even barrage anybody. But I think we could rejigger some of these. And I just noticed something, which I probably noted already, but on the retreat, this battalion should have been on its move side. So apologies for that. But that's another reason why we're going to actually want to do a full activation or a partial activation, is to get him on his deployed side, probably redeploy the 2nd Battalion here into somewhere more useful, and see if we can kind of contain the German push to Eldem Road and east of it, and keep it out of the area around our headquarters. So we're going to remain in prepared defense to the snafu table. The 20th Australian is fresh, so that's a +1. Not coordinated, we're not mixed. There's no game-specific snafu for the Commonwealth. The MSR is complete and at optimal distance, so that's +1. So for a total of +2, the Australians just need, well, there's literally no way for them to fail this roll, but for the sake of doing it, they do roll enough for that partial activation. So they get 1 objective marker that they can place, which I don't think they will. We won't plan on attacking, we just plan on moving our units around and sort of making sure that we contain the German push to this area as much as possible. So we're going to flip this unit for sure. Now we only get half movement on a partial snafu activation. So it'd be nice to be able to get a unit into King's Cross for the extra modifier for having 2 units in a hex, but you see we're not going to be able to get to it with a deployed unit because under here is a Pioneer Battalion, which also only has 4 movement, and as you saw from the movement side of these counters, they don't have an assault arrow, so they're unprepared and they can't be a participant in a defense. So that really limits sort of what our options are. Now we could move 2 and then hope for a second activation. They're fresh, so it'd be a +1 on that roll, and then we might be able to sneak into King's Cross. That might be worth it with the Pioneer Battalion. I think that's probably what we're going to do, but first, just to consolidate our zones of control, we're going to move 2nd Battalion here for half of a movement point, and then we're going to take the Pioneer Battalion out from under headquarters and move, move 1, half, 2, and that's our movement for the partial activation. So now we'd like to, I think, call our activation complete there. So I had a second think about it, and I don't think we're going to go for the second activation at the 20th Australian. As bad as the situation looks with the Panzer battalions closing in on King's Cross, we are quite fine as the Commonwealth because we have up north in Tobruk, we have a whole Australian brigade that is unused, unactivated, fresh, that can come down the Via Balbia this way and counterattack any time that the Germans take King's Cross. That is, if they take King's Cross. So losing King's Cross is not the end of the scenario. It's not the end of the battle. And keeping this Pioneer Battalion here will prevent the Panzer Battalions from moving into the rear of the 20th Australians, cutting off their supply line, maybe getting into Fort Pelestrano, which might be hard for them to be dislodged from, or jumping the Australian headquarters. So keeping this line, I think, for the 20th Australians, containing the 5th Panzer into this side of Tobruk, away from the rest of the objectives, I think is probably the best decision to make, which means the 20th Australians are going to be done for the 11th of April, and they're not going to make a second activation. So that concludes the 20th Australians activation for the 11th of April. And with the conclusion of the 20th Australians activation, that finishes day one of the Easter battle. Sort of to recap a little bit, the 5th Light Division traveled up the El-Adem Road, punched through the 1 battalion of Australians covering the El-Adem Road on the red line, and was able to follow up with a fast panzer push up the El-Adem Road, closing in on King's Cross. Their attack only activated the 20th Australian Brigade, which was able to consolidate its position on the flank of the Germans, preparing, or at least threatening, a counterattack and preventing the Germans from being able to exploit west towards Fort Pelestrano, and linking up with the Brescia Division if somehow, by some miracle, it's able to activate and get into the defenses against the 26th Australian. So right now it's sort of up in the air, but I think both players are as happy as they could be with the situation at the end of day one. So welcome to the 12th of April in the siege lines outside of Tobruk, where we are getting calls hourly from Rommel asking us if we've broken into the city yet, and we have to tell him, no, Herr General, we have not, because we haven't even reached King's Cross yet. Meanwhile, the Commonwealth High Command is worried, but they're pleased that we have contained the access breach to the sort of no man's land between the Red Line and King's Cross. So for the second turn on the 12th of April, the weather is determined to be hot in the triple digits Fahrenheit, I believe. There's no air points or replacements in this scenario, and there's no reinforcements, for turn 2. So we go to the assignment phase, which the Australians have, first of all, they've decided not to unlock all their formations. That has to be the first decision they make. So every formation that's locked is going to remain locked. They believe nothing is so desperate yet that they have to unlock the Brescia Division, essentially. But what they are going to do is they're going to assign 2 of these independent units, the 1st Rail Tank Regiment, which, let's see if we can show them to you. The 1st Rail Tank Regiment, which has 1 AV and 3 action rating, and the 3rd Hussars, which has 3 action rating and light AV. We're going to assign them to the 20th Australians, and hopefully the 20th Australians can put them to good effect and counterattack with them against the German armor. Now, the 3rd Hussars is only a tankette division, tankette brigade, battalion. Well, I'm going to get it eventually. Tankette battalion. So I'm not sure. I think they're cruisers, Mark 1s, I believe. And the Royal Tank Regiment, I'm not sure, maybe Matildas, I think, are their tanks. I'll correct it in the video if I'm wrong. But I believe having those reinforcements might help put some AV power into the 20th Australians' counterpunch when the time comes, if the Germans stumble a little bit in their activation. So for the Germans, they don't have any independent units, but the 5th Light Division does have 2 88 companies that are sitting in support. And this is something when I play this scenario before, I go back and forth on. I don't know whether it is beneficial or not, because the Germans, obviously, they do not have a lot of counters on the board. And with 2 88 companies in support, you're never going to get any use out of the second one. There's no extra modifier as far as I know. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. But there's no extra modifier for having 3 supports in a division. So I sometimes wonder if it might be useful to get the 88 into its independent unit, and then it can use its attack by fire, because in version 2.0 support can't attack by fire anymore, but it can if it's a on the field unit. So it could attack by fire and create a zone of control to help cut off some units. So I think, for the sake of, if for no other reason than experimentation, I think we're going to unassign the 2nd of the 18th 88 company here, and we're going to put it into the field as a real unit. It comes in on its movement side, on the headquarters, and we will be able to use that in our activation to try to put that somewhere that can be useful. You can see on its, there you go, on its deployed side, it has a range of 2 and 4 standoff AV with an action rating of 4. So it's a powerful unit. It only has 1 step, but the 5th Panzer is going to need as much help as it can get. So that's the assignment phase completed. Now we're going to do the first player determination. Red die is going to be Axis, the white die is going to be the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth get the first activation. And actually, because the Commonwealth player won, they have the choice of going first or not, and so they're happy with their situation right now, so they're going to let the Germans go first and then react to the German advance. So the Germans are going to have the first activation, and to nobody's surprise, they're activating the 5th Light Panzer Division. So the 5th Light Panzer has a complete supply train. It's not mixed and it's not coordinated, so we go right into the snafu roll. On the snafu table, the division has fatigue 0. It's not coordinated, it's not mixed. And game-specific snafu is -1, +1 for the optimal distance supply route. So it's a straight die roll. 7 or more gets them a full activation. And they get a 9, which means a full activation with 2 objective markers that they can place. Now, I think obviously, again, to nobody's surprise, the double objective marker is going to go on King's Cross. Has the added benefit of covering the Pioneer Battalion in case we want to split off a little bit. So here we are, zoomed in on the action, and the decision now needs to be made can we get the MG battalion up to King's Cross to at least assist, if not do the attack itself? So half one, half two, half. So 2.5 action or movement points gets us to right on the edge. So I think we're just going to go ahead and move that up there. Now we have options with the 2nd Battalion of the 5th Panzer Regiment. It is the 2-step unit, so it's the more powerful one, so we can either use that to assault King's Cross, or we could use that to threaten the 24th Australian out here on the right, because under this locked marker is the headquarters unit of the 24th Australian. So we could try to jump the headquarters unit on a roll of 1 to 3, I believe. However, it'll be a soft jump, and the headquarters unit just gets to relocate, and it's like we didn't even find it. But on a hard jump, it'll become coordinated, it'll become all kinds of problems. And if we can take King's Cross and kind of rejigger some of our units here, we'll be able to cut off the 24th Australian from its combat supply trains. And maybe start inflicting some step loss isolation issues. But that's all in the future and all contingent upon taking King's Cross. So I think we're going to move the 2nd Panzer Battalion into position to assault King's Cross by half 1, half 2, 3. Now, we have the 1 artillery point from the headquarters for the suppression mission, but first I think we're going to try to drop the support again, the usual MO, and help us on the combat roll when it comes to it. So you would think by now I would have this engagement memorized, but I don't, so we're going to run through the engagement table just like it's the first time doing this. So with the 2nd Battalion, we're attacking the 2nd Battalion of the 15th Australian Regiment, trying to drop its support with an engagement. So for the Panzers, you have 2 AV plus 5 action rating. It's in a double engagement zone for +1 is 8. And on the Australian side, you have 5 action rating plus 2 from the AT company in support is 7, and it's in prepared defense, so it's 8, and it is 8 to 8 straight die roll. The Germans need a 6 or more to drop that support, and they easily get it with a 9. So the support yet again temporarily dropped, and so now we're going to attack by fire, I think, with our second fire event. Now, another question I always ask myself is whether to shock attack with the Panzers. The shock attack modifier now, especially with version 2, you can fire a suppression mission on a shock attack. You give a +1 on the combat table, and the +1 from the hard AV is another modifier. However, you lose the help of the MG battalion, but then it's not finished, and I don't really expect the Panzer Battalion to be going anywhere else, though it would be nice to move it out of that hex and move maybe the Pioneer Battalion up. So that was half 1, half 2.5, 3.5. Yeah, so it's not going to have any. I guess if we had moved it here, it might have had some movement points. But that's what you get for not playing this out all the way through. So we're just going to attack by fire, I think. See if we can get a step loss on that Australian battalion, and then we're just going to assault it the old-fashioned way. So on the attack by fire table. Because it's in the prepared defense, we're going to need 5 or 6. And obviously the Germans with on that. So let's see if we can zoom in on the action. And now we're going to use the MG battalion, I think, to assist this attack. And very riskily, even though it is on 2 steps, so we have a step to give. But we're going to use the Panzer Battalion because it has that extra AR point that we're going to need. So let's see what we get on the combat table modifier list. For the Panzer Battalion, they're at 5 for the AR, double objectives and a 6. We're going to use that suppression mission for +2 is 8. The assist is 9, and that's it. So it's +9 for the Germans. For the Australians, their action rating is 5. Their prepared defenses is 6. And they're not in any kind of hexside terrain, and they're not in terrain themselves. So it's 9 to 6, which is a +3. And so let's see if the Germans can push them out of King's Cross without suffering a humiliating step loss. And they roll a 10. So that's about as good as it could get. So they got a 13, which means the defender loses 2 steps and they retreat. So we get our little step marker here. So the Australian battalion is going to be down to 4 steps. They're going to have to flip to their move side and retreat 3 hexes locally away from the Panzer battalion that attacked them. Now, they ignore terrain and all because, as the rulebook says, the defender found a way. So, oops, sorry. That's how you zoom out. So, with their 4-step marker, 1, 2, 3, I think they'll retreat to El Gubi and the little airport that's there, it looks like. We'll flip them to their movement side. So that was just about the best scenario for the Germans attacking King's Cross. Now, it's not ideal for them to be holding that position with the Panzer Battalion, but it'll do until hopefully they get a second activation, in which case they can rejigger their defenses to put a infantry unit in that spot. But for now, I think what we're going to do is we're going to see if we can jump the 24th Australians headquarters, because I think it's probably likely that the Commonwealth player is going to activate all of his formations or unlock all of his formations anyway, just because now that the Panzers are in King's Cross, they're probably going to want to just nip this whole thing in the bud and stop the playing around. So getting the headquarters unit now before it has a chance to reassess things and get its formation formed up on the correct side will be a smart idea. So we're going to move 1, 2, 3, 4. Now that unlocks this potentially, unless if it was a hard jump. If it's a soft jump, it's just like it was somewhere else. So we will see if it's a, I think I said it was a 1 to 3 before for a soft jump, but it's actually a 1 to 4 for a soft jump. 5 or 6 is a hard jump. So we are going to roll a die. So it's a 2, which means it's a soft jump. And that means that we have to wait for the Panzer battalion to stop moving. But since he had no real plans to move any further anyway, we're just going to say he stopped moving there. And then the Commonwealth has to shift the headquarters and their combat trains, regardless of what was jumped, to make it. Sorry about that. I had a conference with the Commonwealth player and the rule book to discuss what we do with a soft jump headquarters, because in the rule book it says you take the trains and the headquarters and place them in new positions that are legal and all that. And the idea is that the headquarters unit wasn't there to begin with, and the attacking unit just missed them and they didn't actually catch them. And so this area, pan over here, this hex is technically a Commonwealth supply point. So if we follow the rules to the letter, we could put the combat supply train for the 24th Australian here and move the Australian headquarters somewhere over here. But that doesn't seem to be in line with the idea that Tobruk is under siege and the supply train is coming from the port up here. So all we're going to do is move the headquarters unit and say that the headquarters unit wasn't here to begin with. It was actually here. And it remains locked because the German Panzer Battalion didn't actually encounter the headquarters. That's kind of how the that soft jump mechanic works. Is the Panzer Battalion thought the headquarters was there, but it wasn't. It's just been here the whole time. So that's how we're going to resolve that issue. And if I'm wrong, somebody will correct me, but otherwise that's how we're going to do that. So remaining for the 5th Light Division is this Pioneer Battalion, which I think we're going to flip to its deployed side and move up to this road, crossroads right here between the track and Eladam Road, to try to prevent the link up between these two brigades. And if we can get, right now the 24th Australian still has a supply route along the red line here, but in our next activation we might be able to consolidate that, because if we get this 88 Battalion here, on the next activation we could flip it and exert a zone of control over this area, which would cut off the 24th Australian. So that is going to be the turn for the 5th Light Division, the first activation I have to say. So I'm going to clean up real quick here by taking these objective markers and temporary drop support. And we have to roll first fatigue. 3 or lower, we increase our fatigue. And I think that's fair that, oh, can't see that, that the the division is now at fatigue 1 after all that. That was pretty heavy exertion for them. So we mark it fatigue 1. And nothing is isolated. Everything is within command radius of the headquarters. So we're good, and there's a safe path. So we're good on that. No isolation needed. And now we have to roll for our second activation. Ooh, we just get it. We needed a 3, we got a 4. So the 5th Light Division will get a second activation, which will definitely help secure our breakthrough here. So for the Light Division's second activation, we're going to do a normal activation like usual. The MSR is complete, and we're not mixed or coordinated or anything. So onto the snafu table. Like usual, it's the -1 for the game specific snafu, but now we're at fatigue 1, so that's another -1. So -2. Optimal distance for the supply trains gets us a +1 back, so we're -1 overall for the snafu roll. Let's see what we get. We get a 10, which will be -1 to 9, but that's still enough for a full activation for the light division, which is good because I think we will sort of, we have some options. I mean, this is the second activation, so we're gonna be rolling 1 to 2 on the fatigue roll anyway. So we don't really lose anything by placing combat objectives. We're gonna have to do that. It won't increase our chances of getting fatigue. So looking at the map here, we could push forward with our Panzer battalion. We will have to worry about a counterattack coming down the Eldam road, but it would be nice to catch out this battalion while it's on its unprepared move side, and it's on 4 for an action rating. It will be unable to be supported by the rest of the division because of this escarpment here. But at the same time, it would also be nice to bring our panzers around and try to attack to get to Fort Pellestrino. The other option we have is just to sit tight and wait for a couple of turns to see if we can get the Italian reinforcements up here that come in tomorrow and the next day. But they come in way on the side of the board, and they'll probably need a couple of activations, which they probably won't get because of the -3 snafu modifier for the Italians. And so it's just a big ask. It's a lot to hang your hat on, asking to rely on the Italians in this scenario. So the light division is pretty much on its own. So let's move our infantry first and see where that leaves us with the panzers, because we will want to move the Pioneer Battalion to, I think we're going to move them into King's Cross to defend. I think we're just going to keep the Pioneer Battalion in King's Cross, which is where they need to be in order to secure the objective anyway for the victory point. So let's just place them there. Now we need to redeploy our units along here. So we will flip our 88 company onto its deployed side, which will give it a zone of control over this hex at least. So we need to control these 3 hexes in order to cut off the 24th Australian from its supply route. I think we are going to try coming down on the bottom of, or actually we're going to maybe try coming over the top on the Pioneers. They seem to be the weakest unit that the 20th Australian is fielding at the moment, and they're what's standing between us and Fort Pellestrino. So I think what we're going to do is going to move the MG Battalion through King's Cross to here, and then we're going to use the 2nd Battalion of the 5th Panzer Regiment, if I can grab it by itself, just you, to come down 1, 2, and now, oh, I'm sorry, I got excited and I forgot to place our double objective marker. So now I'm going to zoom us in. Okay, so we're zoomed in on the action now. The double objective marker that I totally forgot to place is now on the Pioneer Battalion. The 5th Panzer Regiment is geared up for the attack. We're going to try to drop the support again like usual. Now it's a different unit, so I think we're going to have to calculate the engagement table just when I was starting to memorize the other one. So we're at For the Panzer regiment, we're at 2 AV plus 5 action rating is 7, plus 1 for the double objective zone is 8. And on the Australian side, we're at 3 action rating, plus 2 for the AT company and support is 5, plus 1 for the prepared defense is 6. So 8 minus 6 is 2. So we get a plus 2 on this die roll. We need a 6 or more to drop the support. And just by the skin of our teeth, we get a 6, which you can't see. How about now? We get a 6, which means the Pioneer Battalion drops its support temporarily. And I think we're going to shock attack for no other reason than I want to get at least one shock attack in on this scenario. So we're going to use the 5th Light Division's artillery point to get a suppression mission during the shock attack. So we have an action rating of 5. Plus 1 for the double objective is 6, plus 1 for the suppression mission is 7, and the shock attack AV is hard red for plus 1, so that is 8 to a 3 plus 1 for prepared defense, and there's no hex side terrain or terrain in there. So it is 8 to 4, which is a plus 4, and we shall see what that gets us on the combat table. Get a 9. Plus 4 is 13, which is just about the best result we could get. The defender loses 2 steps and he retreats. So it's at 6 steps now. Minus 2 is 4. We'll flip him to his move side now. The Pioneer Battalion is within 3 hexes of its headquarters unit, which means that instead of retreating 3 hexes, it is removed from the map and it comes back in on the next activation on the headquarters unit. That is that. The temp support is removed. The double objective was there, and the Panzer Battalion advances after combat for free, and now it has half, 1.5. It has 2.5 movement remaining. Well, we'll continue to move down this path anyway. And see what that gets us towards Fort Pilastrano. Now, I didn't use this MG battalion. It moved half a movement point up there. It's not finished, and I don't remember if it's not stopped. So we're going to move him back. So that's 1. He's getting some conflicting orders from Divisional HQ. And we need him to go down to about this area, I think, in order to start cutting off the 24th Australian. We also have the 1st Battalion of the Panzer Regiment to cut off some lines of for the support. So we have this covered. If we move him behind the fortifications, so 1.5. We would just need the Panzer Battalion to cover these hexes if they can reach, or we could move the 88 company into the wire, which is what we might do, and then that would free the Panzer Battalion. I'm sorry. I'm referencing things that you can't see. So I'm talking about this Panzer Battalion and the 88 Company. I'm thinking we're going to move the 88 Company here It'll expose it a bit to counterattack, but that will extend its zone of control to these 2 hexes, and now the 24th Australian is cut off from its supply train, which will affect its next snafu activation when and if it gets there. Now, again, I'm tempted to try to chase down the headquarters unit of the 24th Australian, but I see no real need at the moment to do that. So we're going to move the 1st Battalion of the 5th Panzer Regiment, and we're going to move him. It's tempting to put him in King's Cross, but the counterattack could make them retreat pretty easily, and then the Pioneers would have to move with them. So probably want to put him somewhere that is centralized for the counterattack, and I'm thinking 1, 2, 3. Will probably be our best bet. And next turn he can help his buddy battalion over there to maybe make a push on Fort Pilastrana. So unless I'm mistaken, I think that's the 5th Light Division's 2nd activation complete. We'll remove the double objective marker, and we will now have to do a fatigue roll because we used our attack sequence. 1 to 3 increases our fatigue, and we get a 3. So we're at fatigue 2 now. This is when it starts to get dicey for the Germans, I think. Now those snafu table rolls are going to be extra hard. And we'll see what happens, though, tomorrow with Light Division's activations, because it is done for the 12th of April. At the end of the turn, the Pioneer Battalion comes back in on its move side, on top of the headquarters. German activation complete, and now it is the Commonwealth's turn. And play now switches to the Commonwealth player, who is benefiting from General Shrike's negligence and his focus on the units in the salient that he forgot his poor machine gun battalion out on the Via Balbia waiting orders that no longer needs to be there because the Via Balbia is now cut at King's Cross, preventing the reinforcements from coming in. But we're going to pretend like Shrike was worried that the Pioneers would be pushed off at King's Cross and would open the Via Balbia up in a counterattack. So that's what he's telling Rommel when he explains why the 2nd Machine Gun Battalion is still out at Point Walter and not helping exploit the breakthrough. But for now, the 20th Australian, Lieutenant Colonel Crawford, is going to activate his brigade, and we are going to see what kind of snafu they get. But first we have to decide, do we want to remain in prepared defense? I don't think we are going to remain in prepared defense. So we're going to remove the prepared defense marker from the 20th Australian Brigade to allow them to counterattack, maybe to rejigger their lines, and to just give them greater freedom of movement, because they're the last activation of the day, and starting in the next day on the 13th, the Commonwealth, he's been told, the garrison commander, Laverack, is going to unlock the rest of the units so that he can help put the 18th Australian into counterattacking the Light Division's breakthrough. So Colonel Crawford on the 20th Australian Brigade is activating. Now looking at the snafu, they're fresh, so they get a +1. They're not coordinated, they're not fatigued. No game specific, and they're at optimal distance to their trains, which can be traced, I think, backwards this way through Fort Pellestrano. Yep, they can go that way outside of the zone of control of the Panzer regiment. Now, I do believe they'll have to move out of that zone of control because the headquarters unit can't be there by itself. So that'll be fixed during the activation. But for now, on the snafu table, that is, I believe, I've already forgotten, +1, +2. Yeah, so +2, they're at least getting their partial, but they can get a full because they're out of the prepared defense. And they get a 12, which means they get a full activation and all the goodies that comes with. So with their full activation, the 20th Australian gets to place 2 objective markers. Now, it would be nice to counterattack the 2nd Battalion here. So we're going to place a double objective and sort of force ourselves to figure out a way to attack them so we don't waste the activation. Now, with a fatigue roll, that is. So first what we're going to do is we have to get the headquarters unit out of there so it can retreat, or it's not going to retreat, but it can move 8. But we might just go ahead and there's a lot that they have to do here. So first let's do the easy bit. Flip him to his deployed side, though he might have to stay in his move side because he has to get within 5 hexes of his headquarters unit to stay within command. And half 1, half 2, half. We can get him actually to Fort Pellestrano. That's the 2nd Battalion of the 15th Regiment. He's on 4 steps, but that should be enough to hold that key terrain. That will allow the headquarters unit to retire. We're not retreating, but we're going to retire westward along the blue line. We want to stay out of the 26 Australians blob. So I think we're just going to go 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're still in command radius of everybody. Now we have to move our independent units that got attached to it. The Royal Tank Regiments, Matildas, and the cruisers of the Hussars need to get within command radius, and they also need to start earning their paycheck and counterattacking the panzers over here. So we'll now move them into the fray. With 16 attack movement, they don't have a deployed side. On the primary road, it's half 1, half 2, half 1, half 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5 to Fort Pellestrano. Don't think we want to enter the AV zone of engagement with the tankettes. We'd rather engage them with the Royal Tank Regiment. So we might have to end somewhere south, maybe. Let's see how far south we can get. Half 1, half 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, 6.5, 7.5, 8.5, 9.5, 10.5 maybe. Now we don't want to get any closer to that. The 88 can engage us and we won't really have much of a chance against them with 0 AV, but we might be able to snipe incoming reinforcements if they come up Eldem Road and attack them quickly once they get in through the breach. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's still going to be in command radius of headquarters, so that's good. Now with Matildas, half 1, half 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, 6.5. And because it's real AV, we're going to have to do a stopping engagement against the Panzers here. So Matildas versus Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs. The Matildas are on its move side, but they do have 2 steps, so we'll see how that goes. But Colonel Crawford's getting pressure to counterattack, and he's going to make some shells fly one way or the other. So on the engagement table, it is a double objective zone, so the 1 AV and 3 AR is 4, plus 1 is the double objective zone, is 5. For the target, he has multiple supports, and so he gets a +1. So that's a 5, 6, 7, 8 versus a 5, I believe I said. Yep, 5. So 8 minus 5 is 3, so it's a -3 modifier on this engagement roll. So they roll a 7 minus 3 is 4, and on the engagement table, target is real AV, 5 or less is a fire loss and traffic. So that is less than ideal for the Royal Tank Regiment. They'll have 1 step remaining. And there's traffic in that hex, but nobody else is moving, so I'm going to forego placing the marker. Now, the Royal Tank Regiment does have another fire event, but I think they got their nose bloody enough, and they're creating real AV zone of control here, which means the Panzers will have to attack them before getting to Fort Pilastrano. So it's just adding another layer of Australians that they have to get through. I don't know who actually is manning the Matildas, but it's just another step that the Germans will have to take in order to get to Fort Pilastrano. Now, we could move up the 2nd Battalion here and then use the Matildas to support us and attack against the Panzers. That's awfully tempting. They have 4 steps. We could use this battalion actually to move up too. They're at full strength. Let's do that. Let's do half 1 and use the 1 artillery point for the 20th Australians to suppress the 2nd Battalion, and the Royal Tank Regiment's Matildas to assist this attack, and the 2nd Battalion is going to do a attack on the combat table. So for the Australians, they have 5. They don't have red AV support, but it is a double objective marker, so they're up to 6. Plus 2 for the suppression is 8. Plus 1 for the assist is 9. And that is it for them. On the Panzers, they have a 5 action rating. They're not in prepared defense. They're not in any kind of hex side terrain. They're not in terrain in the hex, but they get plus 2 for being hard red AV in the open. So they get, that's 7. So plus 2 on this attack for the Australians. And they roll a 7. Plus 2 is 9. On the combat table, a 9 is the attacker would suffer a 1 loss if the defender is in prepared defense, but he's not. The the defender has to retreat. So he retreats 3 hexes, flips to his move side, and the Australians will move into that location. So one straight back from this attacker would be somewhere in here. So we'll go 1, 2, 3 maybe. I think would be the most reasonable retreat path. And there's now traffic in this hex as well. So traffic in both of these hexes. Now Lieutenant Colonel Crawford is quite happy with how that turned out. The Fort Pilestrano road to King's Cross is clear, and we've bottled the Germans back up into that salient. Now, unfortunately, we couldn't really do anything about the cut-off 24th Australians, but they don't have to worry about that until they get activated tomorrow. For now, they're living off of half rations, and they're not expending any ammo anyway, so nothing needs to be resupplied. But I believe that'll be all the 20th is going to do. Just looking over here, making sure there's nothing else that needs to be done. We can move the combat trains, I guess, into the supply point now that the independent units are moved out. So yeah, I think we are going to clean up, remove the double objective marker. We're going to leave this unit here, I think. Actually, we'll retreat it 1 hex back to get it behind this fortification line. Give it some help on the defense rolls now that we're not in prepared defense. And I think that's it for the rest of them. Everybody's in command radius. They're not mixed or moving through formations. But I should say these 2 units will get a coordination marker now that I see this. And I didn't fix it. I didn't plan it better. There would have been a way to prevent, if the Royal Tank Regiment and the Hussars had gone this way out to Tobruk, they would have passed through the lines of the 18th Australian. They would have given coordination markers to the 18th Australians and the 20th Australians. Instead, we're going to say they drove down this way and came across. I don't think that'll affect the movement cost at all, especially because this is a primary road. That would have been half movement anyway. So that's the player's fault. I conferred with the German player. He says that's fine. Even though we slack on the realism a little sometimes, I think that'll be the easiest for everybody. So now there's no isolation. The roll for fatigue, 1 to 3, we get an increase in fatigue. We don't, it's a 6. So the brigade remains fresh. And now we have to determine whether we want a second activation. Right now, I think we're fine. We got Fort Pilestrano pretty well secured. A second activation, we could maybe try to gang up on the 88 Company and cut off the Light Division. However, next turn, we'll have more units to activate. We'll be able to throw the 18th Australian into the fray. And once we do that, once we distract the Germans with an attack from the north, that'll free up the 20th Australian to be able to counterattack with some of its units without having to worry so much about being on the defensive. So with that, we're going to call the 20th Australian activation complete. No second activation. And that will be the end of turn 2 the 12th of April in the Easter Battle scenario. I'll catch back up with you on turn 3 on the 13th tomorrow.